Do you ever wake up and just wish that you were somewhere else? A different place, a different world, one full of heroism and adventure, far away from the monotony and pressures of modern living, where there's more to life than studying Albanian road markings and teaching robots to visualize Carl Weezer's presidential inauguration. Well, it sounds like what you might need is an isekai. From light novels to manga to anime, the genre, which translates to a different world in English, has risen to dominate the Japanese media landscape over the past decade. No longer are your weeb epics about giant robots or screaming monkey men, they're about socially inept schlubby guys with no ambition or prospects in life, being whisked away to some cheap Dragon Quest knockoff where he can beat the baddie, win the girl, and claim all the tendies in the kingdom. And while the Eastern Isekai can and has been discussed and dissected to death, I want to turn your focus westward, to where the Isekai genre itself was mysteriously transported to this bizarre and unexplainable new realm known as America. Between 2019 and 2020, a host of animated isekai seemed to pop up out of the blue, and while the portal fantasy, as it's historically been known, is by no means anything new in Western fiction, its surprise resurgence, specifically in animation so soon after the rise of isekais in Japan, raises a few questions. Where did they come from? What inspired them? Why all at once? And what impact are they having on the industry? And so, with the last of this micro-genre wrapping up, now's as good a time as any to try and answer some of these questions. And while we're doing that, let's take a look at each of these shows in turn, because as much as I'm lumping them together, they're all pretty interesting in their own right. Oh, and spoiler warning for each of these shows. If you haven't seen them yet and don't want to get spoiled, I'd recommend switching off the video and going to watch them first, because I genuinely recommend every show on this list. Although, kind of a big caveat around 12 Forever. I will go into more detail during that portion of the video, so if you want to skip ahead to that and check it out, make your mind up first, that's fine, but otherwise, let's take a look at the rise and fall of isekai cartoons. You know what the kids are into? Frogs. If they're not posting Dat Boy, they're out remixing the Squeaky Desert thing. That's what all the kids are into. Or at least they were, like, back in 2017 or whatever when this show got greenlit. Amphibia is a Disney Channel adventure comedy starring Anne Boonchoi, an outgoing second-generation Thai American girl who, upon opening a mysterious box, is transported to a dank, smelly swamp filled with terrifying creatures and the very rarest of pepes. After gaining the trust of the Planter family and other inhabitants of Wartwood, Anne sets out with her cold-blooded compadres to try and find a way back to Los Angeles and discover what happened to her friends, Sasha and Marcy, who are nowhere to be found. What begins as a silly comedy in the goofiest of settings transforms into this epic quest of interdimensional importance with some genuinely shocking moments and surprisingly complex character dynamics. That transformation is apt though. Like the ugly tadpole slowly becoming the majestic bullfrog, the story's key theme is of change, and whether that's through the destruction of beloved locations or character arcs for even the most minor inhabitants, the ever-present nature of change is something that Amphibia reminds us of consistently. Anne first enters Amphibia as a carefree 13-year-old with no idea or real interest in the type of person she'll grow up to be. She lives fully in the here and now, not even bothering to clean the twigs from her hair, and putting off responsibilities and expectations as a problem for future Anne. Early episodes frequently feature Anne's blatant disregard for following the rules, with her mischief often coming at the expense of others. But what Season 3 makes clear is how Anne's experiences in Amphibia have changed her.
Were there bumps in the road? Sure. Did she burn the town down once? Yeah. Did she almost get us eaten by a large creature numerous times? Also yes. Did she... what was I saying?
What I really like about this show is the complicated relationship between Anne and her friends Sasha and Marcy. and how their character growth really questions their bond. Anne describes the trio as being best friends, but from flashbacks we see that it wasn't the sugary sweet wholesomeness you might expect from a Disney show. The whole reason that they're in Amphibia to begin with is because Anne was pressured into stealing the Calamity Box by the other girls, and that her self-centered behaviour is largely learned from her time with Sasha and Marcy. The only reason that Anne was so dismissive of her rule breaking is because she was conditioned into it, for fear of being belittled by her friends. It's only when she's forced to spend time away from them that she can reevaluate her decisions and begin to stand up for what she thinks is right. And the catalyst for that growth is the uncomplicated, unconditional support she starts to receive from Hop Pop, Polly, and especially Sprig. And because Anne's growth as a character comes from her being away from her friends instead of adventuring by their sides like you might see in a more traditional story, there's a real tension that the stresses the story puts on their relationships could break it irreparably, and that might not actually be such a bad thing.
Anne, I know you're upset, but just— No! I'm done listening to you! I'm done trusting you! You're a horrible person, and I am done being friends with you!
Oh, snaps.
Anne, you don't mean that. We can still fix this.
No, Marcy, we can't.
Show creator Matt Brawley based the girls' relationship on a friend group he had growing up, and it really shows in the final product with the subtle power dynamics that exist between the characters. Back on Earth, Marcy has her grades and Sasha has her charisma, which causes them to look at Anne as something of a junior partner within their group. Still their friend, but not to be taken as seriously, which is why Anne is always on the back foot, willing to go along with their mischief in order to make up for her own shortcomings and try to fit in.
In the third temple, when Marcy runs up to Sasha, and they're immediately just like, oh my god, it's so great to see you, and she's like, yeah, you too, look at your armor, wow. They're on the level, they're on the same level. And I think to them, and this is super sad and a little bit dark, but I think to them, like, Anne is like a little bit lower. And I think, but they're both sort of up here, and they're very aware.
And that insecurity that Anna has over the imbalance in power is partly what makes her such a great main character for this show. Because she's less sure of herself than the others, she doesn't jump to an immediate conclusion upon entering Amphibia like they do. Sasha sees Amphibia as this obstacle to be overcome and will do whatever necessary to get the trio home, regardless of right or wrong. Conversely, Marcy sees Amphibia as this dream come true and would happily stay there forever, regardless of how naive that might be. Anne, on the other hand, is initially grossed out by the swamp, but is willing to work with the frogs until she's figured out how to get back home, and eventually grows to care for its inhabitants, and not just because they satisfy her shallow fantasy wish fulfillment. Although Sasha and Marcy definitely do have their own character development, in taking that middle ground between their extremes, Anne starts in the most dynamic position, allowing for the most growth. And that growth is what allows Anne's true strengths to shine. Once she's over her insecurities and takes an active role in standing up for herself and those she cares for, Anne demonstrates that she is the moral compass of the group. She's the one that Sasha and Marcy know is right, even when they won't admit it, and who they turn to when they need reassurance. And without the heightened pressure of Amphibia, none of them might ever have recognized that.
Come on, you guys, we can do this! They may think we're just a weak little frog family, a clumsy nerd, a big metal baby, and a goofy pushover, but they have no idea who they're dealing with. Well, except for you guys, I'm sure they think very highly of you too.
Obviously, there's a lot more to the show. I've only focused on the character dynamics that I found the most interesting, but I've barely touched on the close-knit froggy found family that are the Planters. If Anne's relationship with Marcy and Sasha is this intricate cerebral brain of the show, then her relationship with Sprig, Polly and Hop Pop is definitely the heart. And I've not even mentioned the setting or the world, because I wasn't initially into the pokey little swamp village that is Wartwood. It's not without its charms, but I thought it was just okay as a setting. But the road trip through all the new locations they visit in Season 2 is an absolute treat. And when they get to the capital, which is Newtopia, I don't know how they made this setting cool, but somehow they managed to pull it off. And also, if I didn't get anything else out of the show, I now know that olms are an animal that exists, and they look like someone took an axolotl and just like stretched it out, even though they live exclusively in Croatia and axolotls live exclusively in Mexico City, because convergent evolution is just one hell of a drug. Watch Amphibia. So, besides the obvious use of, you know, a portal and fantasy elements, the one thing that seems consistent across all these portal fantasies is the willingness to broach more mature subject matter than would be typically expected for a kids show. I've already talked about how Amphibia tackled the complexity of its three-way friend group, and even with all that, main characters getting kebabbed and this monstrosity, the overall tone of Amphibia is still on the cheerier side of this list. It's all part of what seems to be an effort by studios to produce cartoons aimed at a slightly older demographic, in response to changes in audience behaviour, new forms of competition, and which shows have had the greatest impact in recent years. And on that note, it's hard to argue that any cartoon in the last decade has had quite as much success in attracting older viewers than Gravity Falls. Like, I'm sure you've all seen this image at some point. People tend to think of cartoons as having lineages, and one way or another, either through having shared staff or just sheer influence, Gravity Falls has its DNA all over the current crop of cartoons. Though it only ran for 2 seasons between 2012 and 2016, Alex Hirsch's mystery-fueled adventure saw the Pines twins teaming up with their great uncle Stan to save the world from an interdimensional demon and explain the twisted phenomena plaguing the sleepy town of Gravity Falls, Oregon. Over the course of its run, the show garnered a dedicated international fanbase, drawn to the show for its surreal dark humour, long-running mysteries, and intricate use of codes and clues that encouraged fans to feel part of the story. This all culminated in an elaborate alternate reality game to celebrate the show's finale, in which thousands of fans across 3 continents worked together, solving a series of puzzles to locate a statue of the show's villain, Bill Cipher. By any measure, Gravity Falls was a success, taking home awards, setting viewership records, and demonstrating a viable older audience for Disney cartoons. The House of Mouse were no longer just contending with challenges from the regular competition, but also from video games, the internet, and the rise of less risk-averse streaming services. And Gravity Falls was exactly the sort of win the Disney TV animation studio needed, especially in an era when the landscape of children's entertainment was changing and the studio's relevance was coming under question within the larger Disney conglomerate. And the influence of Gravity Falls isn't just evident in the Disney shows that followed, with the creators of Amphibia and the Owl House both being former Gravity Falls alumni, but in the sort of shows that were greenlit elsewhere in its wake, targeting that slightly older demographic which Gravity Falls helped to establish. And if there's one show that makes the most of that trend towards more mature material, that show is Infinity Train. No, not that one. Shut up. Each season of this anthology series stars a new kid who gets straight up child abducted onto the Infinity Train, an impossibly long locomotive existing in an alternate dimension, with each train car containing its own unique pocket universe. And if that wasn't enough, each surprise passenger is branded with a fluorescent number which changes as a result of their actions. By giving each new character a clear emotional issue that they're trying to overcome, and having the number decrease as they learn to cope with it, eventually freeing them once it hits 0, Infinity Train has gamified character development into a numerical value, giving the entire series this ticking clock sense of urgency. The train itself acts as a metaphor for life, constantly throwing new scenarios at its passengers and forcing them to either get over their issues and adapt, or risk being left behind. Pair all that with the show's oppressive retro-industrial tone and the inherent mysteries posed by the mere existence of the train, and what results is a show with the strongest premise out of any on this list. It's unfortunate then that despite having such a good concept, Infinity Train was the show I felt most disappointed by, at least in season 1. The show premiered its pilot in 2016 before releasing its first episodes proper in 2019, and it's clear that Cartoon Network were experimenting with this show. The network greenlit the series largely off the back of the success they'd enjoyed with their first official miniseries, Over the Garden Wall. Slight aside, if you haven't seen Over the Garden Wall, go do it because it's a goddamn masterpiece. And Cartoon Network went with a writer's room on Infinity Train rather than the usual storyboard-led approach typical to most cartoons. And while this was probably the right call in terms of having more oversight over the continuous narrative of Infinity Train, it definitely hurt the pacing. Most of the writers themselves were storyboarders by trade, including showrunner Owen Dennis, and were as unfamiliar with the setup as Cartoon Network.
I feel like something to point out is that I think of the 5 of us, Justin's the only one who'd actually been in a writer's room before.
To be fair, can I point out, it was never like a consistent job. Like this was very much like a first writer's room job.
It was all
for me also
new for all of us.
And given that the season's entire runtime is under 2 hours, trying to fit in this emotional arc about accepting your parents' divorce while introducing a new self-contained world with a clear moral message every 10 minutes, it's not surprising that Tulip's story doesn't really have enough breathing room. I don't think I've ever seen a season of TV that would more clearly have benefited from longer episodes than Book 1 of Infinity Train. But none of that particularly matters, because by Book 2, all of those issues are remedied entirely. By focusing more on the narrative across its entire season and not wrapping up its chapters neatly at the end of each episode, Lake and Jesse's stories avoids all the rushed pace of the first season and shows just how powerful Infinity Train storytelling can be and how much it benefits from its anthology format. In the 7th episode of Season 1, Tulip entered the Chrome Car and noticed her reflection acting of its own volition. Throughout the episode, Tulip helped her mirrored self escape the car, where the two parted ways. And although this was definitely one of the stronger episodes in the season, there's no real indication that Mirror Tulip was any more significant than the other denizens of the train. It's not until Season 2 where we see Mirror Tulip again, this time pairing with Jesse, a new kid taken aboard the train, with the series now asking whether or not a denizen without a number can ever escape into the real world.
Oh, sure. I mean, that must be why the train is so keen on getting you back. So it can help you get your shiny green number down. Or, oh, so sorry, forgot. You don't have one.
You don't know anything.
What did you think would happen if you were allowed through the exit? You just go out into the world with your metal skin and your magic gear and what? High school? Prom? College? Job? You and your prime with parallel lives?
I'll figure it out.
This highlights 2 of the things that Infinity Train does best. 1, taking advantage of its anthology format and building interesting background characters into leading protagonists, giving a sense that anyone on the train can be a main character. And 2, questioning the rules established by the show to fuel the audience's imagination and deconstruct its own logic. This is all furthered again in Season 3, after the show moved from Cartoon Network to HBO Max, allowing it to tackle its topics in a more adult fashion. When Grace and Simon, the antagonists from the Mall Car episode, became the new main characters, it posed questions about what happens to the kids who never leave the train, and whether or not there is a point of no return for them. By not being tied down to a single protagonist, the anthology format allows Infinity Train more freedom to explore its concepts in dynamic ways, by coming at different aspects of the train from different angles via different main characters, giving a sense that the train's mysteries are too big and complex for any one passenger to truly comprehend, while still offering narrative satisfaction at the end of each season. This format also pairs well with the show's concept of quantifying character development into a numerical value, allowing Infinity Train to bake a meta-narrative on the formulaic nature of character arcs into its subtext without completely subverting the idea of having character arcs altogether. Season 1 essentially serves as a textbook example of how the train should work as intended, by taking someone and forcing them to confront their issues until their number hits 0 and they are fixed. But while the idea of assigning a value based on someone's emotional maturity might work in broad strokes, it's a pretty flawed system in practice. What exactly is the quantifiable difference between, say, 70 and 69?
Nice.
How does the train decide exactly what the end point of someone's development should be? And does the train actually care about the people it's shown to help, or is it just out to satisfy whatever cold, calculated logic it's running on? That's where the show really shines from season 2 onwards, in taking the foundation laid by Tulip's story, elevating the concept and trying to tackle some of those questions about the true nature of the train, and intertwining everything with the personal storyline of the new main character. It creates a moving season of TV, tightly packed with genuine excitement and moral ambiguity. Infinity Train is not afraid to ask the deeper questions about its characters or its own rules. Just because the passengers we see exit the train are in a better place than when they stepped on, doesn't mean we have to think of the train as this benevolent, infallible entity. If the train is a metaphor for life, does it exist to altruistically help the characters work past their issues? Or is it simply conforming them into a predetermined ideal of how they should behave, based on cold logic rather than human experience? That's for us to decide, because this show is not going to give any easy answers away. Not even the writers themselves agree on everything, apart from this train being on a one-way trip to ambiguity.
We have certain rules for the train, we have certain things that we all agree on, but because some of these things are emotional or intention-based, even the room doesn't always agree on specific things that we see in the text of the show. At the end of season 2, I think that all of us have varying degrees on where we believe 1-1 lied. Was he trying to be helpful and looking for an excuse to help her? Or was he truly cold and calculating and really only cared about saving the train and was disinterested in if she actually got off? We all wrote the show. We all look at the text of the show, it's made, and even within the writer's room, we don't necessarily 100% agree on the intentions of the characters.
By constantly asking questions not just about the character's journey, but the rules of the setting and the very nature of character development itself, the show inevitably raises more questions than it could ever hope to answer. So one of the big parts of the Infinity Train experience is not having all the answers and coming to your own conclusions about why certain things happen. No exaggeration, it genuinely took me 3 or 4 days to wrap my head around whether or not I felt Simon deserved his fate, and regardless of whether he did or didn't, why it was right to include that in the story. And that is some powerful storytelling. And while I might not have been initially impressed by what the show was putting out, by its end, I've got no doubts that Infinity Train is one of the most ambitious and impressive cartoons to come out over the last decade. So in a video that's about the rise and fall of the Western Isekai, this might seem like quite a way into the video before I've started talking about the influence of anime. But part of the point of this video is to demonstrate that it's not quite as cut and dry as simply Isekai do good in Japan, America copy. There are more factors at play here, however that isn't to minimise the impact of anime as an inspiration on these shows or the market as a whole. From Dana Terrace insisting her characters follow Ken Sugimori style proportions, to Rad Seacrest taking visual cues from Tekken Kincrete, to Matt Brawley ending his show with an open love letter to Dragon Ball Z, pretty much all of these creators have a story about falling in love with Japanese media during their formative years, finding something in it that they just weren't getting from Western cartoons and using that as an inspiration to tell more challenging stories aimed at younger audiences. And that shouldn't come as a surprise. The people making cartoons today tend to be in their late 20s to early 30s, the sort of ages which would have seen the first waves of anime and manga washing up on Western shores in any significant volume. You no longer needed a guy who knew a guy who could get you a bootleg VHS of Captain Harlock. Tenchi Muyo was on Toonami. Hey look, there's Ida. Love Hina was in bookshops, Pokemon was on the smallest and biggest of screens. While not yet mainstream, anime and manga was widely accessible for the first time, and it would leave its mark on the showrunners of the future. It's taken a little while for that impact to be felt slightly higher up the corporate ladder though. Executives making decisions about which shows get greenlit haven't warmed up to anime, or more specifically the idea of commissioning serious animation for older audiences quite as readily as their creative counterparts. And it's only been in recent years, with changes in media consumption demonstrating self-sustaining niche consumer groups and the widening acceptance of anime among general audiences, that we've seen a shift in attitudes towards animation for anyone over the age of 12. The idea that animation either has to be a kids show or an inane adult comedy has been hard to shake in the West, and in the decades where that idea has been essentially treated as law, Japan's formed a monopoly on a market that US animation neglected. And now that the value of that market is being recognised, what we're seeing with these shows are the first tentative steps into the water, and hopefully a sign of more exciting and experimental things to come. And on the subject of experimentation, nothing quite screams the Disney brand like medieval grotesques, blatant occultism, and the gays. So it was only a natural fit when the House of Mouse gave the green light to Dana Terrace's story of sensibly sapphic sorcery, The Owl House. Meet Luz Naseda, a 14-year-old Dominican American heroine who always seems to have her face buried in a fantasy story. Luz begins the series isolated from those around her, until the day she's supposed to leave for summer camp and stumbles upon another reality, one filled with magic where it might just be possible to live out her dream of becoming a witch. These are the Boiling Isles. While she's there, Luz moves in with Ida, the cursed owl lady, peddler of knickknacks from the human realm, and a so-called wild witch who refuses to conform to the systems and regulations of the Isles. King, a tiny, demanding, Cubone-ass beanie baby who proclaims himself the king of demons, and Hootie, who, by virtue of being part owl and part house, is, in my estimation, the de facto main character.
What the heck did you two get into?
Excuse me, we're having a moment here.
You'll never understand what we've been through together. Never!
Moment ruined.
I will be haunted by my actions forever. Hoot hoot!
Other inhabitants of the Boiling Isles include notable students from Hexside Academy and Luz's eventual classmates Willow, Gus, and Amity, alongside the Isle's shady ruler Emperor Belos and Ida's sister/rival Lilith. If you're looking for that next Gravity Falls, The Owl House is about as close as you'll find, with showrunner Dana Terrace a former Gravity Falls crew member herself, and Alex Hirsch providing voices for a few of the major characters. But beyond some shared credits, The Owl House does that great thing that Gravity Falls did in introducing a setting and a story that seem interesting enough, and then building it out over its run into something truly unexpected. What's immediately apparent from The Owl House is the amount of thought and personality that's gone into crafting its setting. I've already talked about the influences of anime, and it's worth mentioning that this show might have taken just one or two things from Little Witch Academia, but a quick look at Dana's personal art will tell you all about the influences she takes, and it's impressive just how much of that she's managed to squeeze into this show while still having things look Disney friendly. We're talking about things like medieval illuminated manuscripts, the surrealist paintings of Remedios Vero, and most obviously, the indescribable imagery of Hieronymus Bosch. But it's not simply her influences, but her experiences too. On the Boiling Isles, witches are expected to specialise in a particular focus of magic, severing their connection to their other abilities, something both Luz and Ada fight against.
When you join a coven, all your other magic is sealed away. From now on, that kid will only be able to make illusions. Since I never joined a coven, I can do every kind of magic. That's why I'm the most powerful witch on the Boiling Isles.
which reflects Dana's own experiences of animation school, where students were encouraged to focus on limited roles, whereas Dana wanted to keep herself open to trying everything, something she feels she's now found in the role of showrunner.
There was a heavy emphasis on specializing. You're either a character designer, or you're a layout artist, or you're a storyboard artist, and if you're a mix of all those things, you're diluting your portfolio and you're making your presentation to studios weaker. So I hated that. I really liked doing a little bit of everything, and the more I learned about show running and directing is that it really is just a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So I fell in love with the job through that.
That idea of not conforming to standard expectations is essentially at the heart of everything the Owl House is about. The show is a celebration of differences and eccentricities, and about embracing them as part of who you are, rather than hiding them to fit in with what other people expect. Within the story, every character undergoes some degree of realization in order to accept who they really are and make the necessary change. Whether it's as grand scale as Ida learning to live with her curse, or Amity coming to terms with how awful her mum is, or on the smaller side of things, like Willow recognizing that she's better at plant magic than abominations. Outside of the story, however, this manifests in the show's steadfast support of representation. Obviously, the headline grabber for the Owl House is having the Disney Channel's first gay lead couple in Luz and Amity, who, after not starting on the best of terms, quickly discover that they have feelings for one another, which is something else that they have to accept about themselves. As well as the show having the channel's first major non-binary character in Rain Whispers. And as much as these are what people will talk about in terms of breaking down barriers, it's also worth taking a step back and seeing where else the show is making strides. Racially diverse cartoon casts have been the norm for a while, but it's worth pointing out that Luz is specifically a Spanish-speaking Dominican girl who is coded as having attention deficit disorder. On top of that, the cast is overwhelmingly female-led, featuring women of all ages, making sure to put women 40 and over in prominent, powerful positions where they will see plenty of action. Something Dana was hell-bent on doing after being told nobody wants to see a show about old ladies prior to pitching. In a roundabout way, this all sort of leads into one of the things I really like about the Owl House, in that none of the characters feel like a standout stereotypical hero. And it all helps to sell the idea that these characters need to embrace their identities and each other in order to save the day. That all being said, the show isn't without its troubles, primarily in its first season. The Owl House took a good while, at least a dozen episodes, to find its footing. Luz stays in the Boiling Isles to learn magic from Ida, but then immediately enrolls in Hexside to learn there, so it leaves their relationship in a bit of an awkward, undefined limbo. Similarly, Amity, who debuts as a spoiled bully, almost immediately softens up to Luz and her friends as quickly as she's introduced, making that introduction fall kinda flat when the show can't stick to it for more than 5 minutes. Some of this, I know, was down to executive meddling, but as a viewer, doesn't really make the final watch any less bumpy. But luckily, by the end of Season 1, and certainly into Season 2, the Owl House truly takes wing. And, as it's not out at the time I'm recording this, I'm really excited to see where it ends up during Season 3. So talking about the Owl House leads nicely onto discussing representation across all these shows and how it goes hand in hand with the idea of writing for a slightly older demographic. With so many of these shows being aimed at kids in their early teens and being built around themes of change and acceptance, there is a natural inclination for these shows to include a more diverse cast of characters, reflecting the kinds of people that those watching might meet or identify with as they begin to explore more of the world. In terms of LGBT inclusivity, it's something we really started to see cartoons make strides in about 10 years ago, chiefly by Steven Universe, although technically I think Clarence got there first, which has become more prevalent in family-aimed media ever since, but that is not to say that it is a linear route of progression from having no representation at all to absolute normalization. The corporate relationship with progressive politics is a complex one. On the surface, these big media companies are happy to champion themselves as allies to any progressive cause under the sun. They're all for representation. but they're willing to throw all that under the bus if it means squeezing a few extra dollars out of a foreign market where gay people still get stoned to death, or partnering with oppressive Chinese government agencies that are complicit in the genocide of minority groups, or financially supporting anti-gay legislation in the States. Let's be clear, I am explicitly talking about Disney here because they are the worst for this, but it's true to a lesser extent throughout the industry.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Serious crap.
As a result, showrunners get sent a ton of mixed messages from higher ups on what's acceptable and what isn't, and it's not like there's a consistent stance from studio to studio. I've listened to a lot of interviews from these creators in preparation for this video, and on the one hand you've got stories like Kipo showrunner Rad Seacrest pitching the idea of Benson being gay to DreamWorks executives and being told, if that's the case, if that's a story decision, then Benson should explicitly say the words "I'm gay" on screen, meaning that this scene, which was absolutely pivotal in defining Benson as a character, was the direct result of a DreamWorks executive suggestion. On the other hand, you have far less positive recounts of things like Owen Dennis having to campaign Cartoon Network for 7 months before they'd allow him to have an Amerindian protagonist.
With Jesse, that was a character, he was native. I was like, oh, I want to be this native character, and they were like, no, absolutely not, you can't do that. And I was like, why? And they were like, well, it's because, you know, you could have chosen any race, but that one's just like, that one's a really hard one. That's like a big third rail. And I was like, okay, but I just want like consultant to come in and we can like talk about it a bit and like all this sort of stuff. And they're like, no, absolutely not. And it took, I want to say, about 7 months of convincing.
And even then they had to sneak the only line of dialogue that identifies his heritage in during post-production. And as someone who doesn't live in America, this sounds like insanely bizarre, because I can at least anticipate corporations being hesitant around gay and trans issues in kids media, but why would Cartoon Network try so hard to avoid having a native lead character? That makes no sense to me. So, like, if there's something I'm missing in my ignorance, can an American let me know, like, what the hell is happening there? But regardless of some of these setbacks, on the whole, corporations are more aware of the importance of representation than ever before, largely in part due to the increased fan engagement and press coverage that they receive when they push the envelope for more inclusivity. And yeah, I'm sure that at least some of the decision making is probably quite cynical. On the whole, it's beneficial to the showrunners and the audience that the creators are more free to tell stories that better represent them and the kind of things they want to tell stories about. So that Matt Braley can do things like have Anne's character design based off his grandma's childhood photos, and the strangeness of Amphibia representing that initial isolation he felt on family trips to Thailand. Or Kipo having an all-black main cast, although you sort of have to look past the fact that Kipo is literally purple. Or the Owl House changing Rain's skin colour to better match Avi Roque once they were cast in the role. Just some little touches that help these stories better represent the vision and intention of the creators, and to help these stories feel just a little bit richer while giving some visibility to those in the audience that might not have always felt so included in the past. Kipo Oak is just your average purple 12-year-old living in an underground fallout shelter when a giant mutant monkey attacks and destroys her subterranean home, separating her from everyone she's ever known and leaving her topside in a post-apocalyptic city. We've all been there. And I know what you're thinking. This isn't an isekai. Where's the portal? Where's the other world? And to that I say, shut up. She is taken from her normal, well-structured home life and thrust into this world of fantasy and crazy animals that she's never seen before and is experiencing for the first time. It is thematically and structurally consistent with the portal fantasy genre, so it counts. End of story. As a Netflix DreamWorks project, Kipo is unique in that it bucks the usual trend of rebooting classic properties. Kipo is the brainchild of longtime DreamWorks employee Rad Seacrest and an adaptation of his personal webcomic. As a result, the style of Kipo is something very particular to Rad's tastes and influences, creating a distinctive identity for Kipo that sets it apart from other shows. Music, for example, plays a huge part in making Kipo what it is, with the show having one of the most listenable soundtracks of pretty much any cartoon ever, featuring a list of fully original songs produced just for the show by series music supervisor Daniel Rojas, covering everything from rap to K-pop to country jamborees, both diegetic and non, and featuring cameos from the likes of Wu-Tang Clan's Jizza.
The universe dispersed mass, traverses space, time past, space expanding mad fast. Stars made of light and gas, cosmos with billions of stars gleaming.
These are the events that brought us worlds into being.
New time, new time.
Elsewhere in the audio, with the notable exception of Daniel Steven Scarlemagne, voice actors were encouraged to read for their characters in their natural voices, leading to a level of authenticity in their performances. This becomes incredibly apparent, particularly in Kipo's case herself, as voice actress Karen Fukuhara's infectious natural optimism just shines through her readings for Kipo. Visually, the show is just as unique, taking a Walking Dead inspired post-apocalyptic setting, but filtering its darkness through a brightly coloured angular art style inspired by Tekken Concrete and Fooly Cooly.
I mean, I'm a huge anime fan, so I'm a huge fan of Tekken Concrete. I'm a huge fan of Fooly Cooly, but also like I've been working at DreamWorks since 2006. So I'm surrounded by designers like Nico Marley, who designed Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon. And that artwork's always been up on the wall. I've always been looking at it. I've always been working on those movies. That between looking at Nico's stuff and then my anime influences, I feel like the drawing style is just kind of halfway between those two things.
And populating the city with eccentric mutated tribes of lumberjack cats, exercise raccoons, and mafia frogs, who've reclaimed the world, reflecting Seacrest's own interpretation of Los Angeles, and how the people within the city all seem to fall within their own niche communities. The show oozes style, from its striking title cards, to its vibrant use of colour, to Studio Mia's ever excellent animation, to the obscene drip worn by its characters, all of which helps sell the setting as an authentic location and makes it easier for the audience to care about. When it comes to the story, Bill Wolkoff was brought onto the show to help flesh out the narrative and the relationship between the characters. At the core of that is the relationship between the ever-diplomatic Kipo, whose personality was inspired partially by Aang's optimism from Avatar The Last Airbender, and her companion, Wolf, described by Rad and Bill as Mad Max in the body of a 10-year-old girl.
Now let's try to focus so we can get out of this death trap. Oh, come on. Does it always have to be life or death? Can't it be have fun for a minute? No.
These two are very clearly natural opposites who, alongside Mondu, Benson and Dave, must learn to work together to unite the mute tribes of Las Vistas against the megalomaniacal Gamers Rise Up mandrill known as Scarlemagne. Originally, the setting of Kipo was intended to be much darker, though in the process of coming up with its world and its inhabitants, Rad leaned more into his natural irreverence, giving Las Vistas a sort of Ghibli-inspired sense of wonder. That being said, some of the story's initial darkness does seep through at times, particularly in the tragic, tortured backstories of Scarlemagne and Wolf. Especially Wolf. That shit got surprisingly grim, but what that does is sell the difficult dispositions of these characters and the struggle in Kipo's efforts to get them to see the good in the world. And that's really Kipo's major obstacle throughout the show, and why she's such a compelling main character. In a world that's seen 200 years of decay and division, Kipo stands as a breath of fresh air, with her optimism standing in stark defiance of the cynical world she's stepping out into, not even allowing her own struggles to get in the way when it comes to lending a hand to others, despite all the personal baggage she ends up having to deal with throughout the series. As an outsider, Kipo is unique in seeing Las Vistas with fresh eyes and is in constant awe of the incredible things she discovers there each day, which the mutes have come to take for granted. I'll admit that those early episodes of the gang just strolling through the streets and running into whatever mute community they happened upon and making a whole adventure out of that were my fondest. I generally tend to prefer longer form storytelling over the episodic approach, so this is very unlike me, but there was something about the way that the show was able to explore its world, in part due to how incredible everything looked and sounded, that was endlessly charming to me, and I feel like some of that was lost when the show focused more on its story. although that could just be down to Kipo busting out all 3 seasons of its run between January and October of the same calendar year. So with that in mind, it's pretty incredible that this show isn't a complete mess from top to bottom. Everything about Kipo comes across as one of a kind, from its origins to its presentation to its release schedule. I remember when Netflix made the announcement for Kipo, the first season coming out of nowhere and dropping on Netflix just a few weeks after it was announced. So there's something poetic about this show bowing out as mysteriously as it entered, introducing us to a totally unique world full of unforgettable characters and a story about how this purple jaguar girl united the city to overcome its differences and make where they live a better place. It's also pretty on brand for Netflix. Seriously, how do you expect anyone to find and watch these shows when you make no effort to promote them? Do better. Okay, so you've got trends coming from other shows, coming from anime, coming from audience behaviors, but why portals? Why would so many shows land on such similar premises? So to look at that a little bit more specifically, I think you've got to put yourself in the shoes of these creators and think about why they would choose to tell a portal fantasy over a story that isn't one. What advantages does the portal give you when it comes to storytelling? And honestly, I think a lot of it's pretty straightforward. Immediately, whatever is on the other side of that portal stands in complete contrast to the real world, and that's a very strong opening. Rather than creating this all-encompassing fantasy setting that is the be-all and end-all of the story, you have a clear division for the viewer and the characters that says, this is the real world on one side, anything over that threshold is a world of my own creation. And sometimes that can give a very clear hook to your audience about what the story is saying and why they should care. One of the earliest examples of the portal fantasy, The Blazing World by Margaret Cavendish, written in 1666, is a story of a woman taken to another world full of talking animals and mythical creatures, and over the course of the story engaging with the realms of science, philosophy, government and war in this alternate reality, which drew a stark contrast with what women were allowed to do in the real world at that time. So the idea of using the portal to draw parallels with real world experiences, either to make your characters more relatable or for political commentary, is something that people have been doing literally for centuries. In that same vein, it's also narratively beneficial to have your hero enter the fantasy world from our world to help acclimatize your audience to this new setting. In this way, the protagonist essentially becomes the viewer's window into this world. Just like us, they're the newbie here and they will be asking the same questions we would if we were in their place. This is something that's become prevalent over in the Isekai genre, as it gives the writer all the excuse they need to info dump exposition about overcomplicated magic systems and lore, and while it's been quite widely derided, having a character who is naturally more inquisitive than the locals does make getting info across to the audience more efficient. And it gives the writer plenty of opportunities to explore minor details of their setting, by getting the hero into all sorts of trouble because they don't understand the most basic concepts of the realm. But really, the most important reason for the use of portals, specifically for this crop of cartoons, is what the metaphor of the portal is. Look at the heroes of these stories, all 12, 13, 14 years old. Characters on the cusp of adolescence, leaving their childhood behind and stepping out metaphorically and physically into a big, confusing new world. All of these stories are on some level about embracing change and self-discovery and learning to accept differences. All vital skills needed by kids as they hit their teens, and exactly the sort of messages that we all look for in coming-of-age stories. So it's only natural that if these networks are experimenting with stories pitched to a slightly older audience, that we would see so many portal fantasies that lend themselves so easily to more complex narratives and the relevant themes for that tweens to early teens age bracket. So that brings us to the final show on our list, something of a surprise package that never really enjoyed the same reception or success as the other shows, but I think is still worth talking about. That show being 12 Forever. The show was released on Netflix in July 2019 and follows 12-year-old Reggie Abbott, a hyperactive, imaginative kid who refuses to grow up, and her friends Todd and Esther. Unbeknownst to the rest of the world, Reggie holds a key to an alternate dimension known as Endless, where she and her friends spend their free time hanging out with the island's bizarre inhabitants, playing with their superpowers, and battling the evil Butt Witch who wants to destroy Endless. It's all fairly tame stuff on the surface, but over the course of its season, 12 Forever delves a lot deeper than I was ever expecting it to. Outside of Endless, things are a lot less ideal for Reggie. Her refusal to grow up has isolated her from her classmates, her mum doesn't understand her, and her older brother, I think he'd probably describe Reggie as being pretty cringe. In terms of its setup, this is very much like the Owl House. A teenage girl who doesn't fit in escapes to a realm of fantasy where she can truly be herself. But the huge difference here is in how 12 Forever explores that. Unlike Lou's, Reggie's eccentricities aren't treated as quirky nerdisms, they're seen as immature and gross. She keeps a collection of her own scabs, which creeps out even her friends, and when faced with anything that makes her confront the realities of growing up, she shuts down entirely and closes herself out. Her immaturity manifests in self-centered tantrums whenever things don't quite go her way, and this is especially true when it starts to happen on Endless, with Todd and Esther's growing maturity interfering with Reggie's idea of how they should spend their time on her island.
If you guys don't like me, then just get off my island!
I don't want to be here anyway.
And threatening to tear apart the friend group she's desperately trying to cling to preserve the last remaining remnants of her childhood. Reggie is self-centered, but she's also complex, and a strangely refreshing example of a child main character. In many ways, she feels like a more honest depiction of a 12-year-old than the majority of other shows. Her actions are genuinely off-putting at times, whether because she's so gross or because of how she lashes out at those around her over minor provocations. She's not an idealized protagonist questing out to discover her hidden powers, she is a short-sighted, impulsive child with absolutely zero self-awareness. At times, Reggie's relationship with her mum reminded me of the Babadook of all things, never seeing eye to eye and just wanting her daughter to be normal.
Regina, oh, look at you. You're a mess. I thought this would be fun for us, but you can't behave for one day. Esther's having a nice time. Why can't you?
It feels like it's written from the perspective of a parent who knows the difficulties of raising a problem child, and while I would certainly question whether that's an appropriate approach to take in a show that's made for the kids, not the parents, I've got to admit it's really interesting to see a cartoon try and tackle something that heavy.
I'm not a mess. Maybe I am.
Similarly, in Reggie's relationships with Todd and Esther, as her friends become more interested in things for kids their age and take on their own responsibilities and goals, essentially developing personas beyond just being Reggie's play pals, we see Reggie gradually push them away and selfishly retreat deeper into Endless.
Okay, sure, it may not revolve around you guys, but we can agree that Endless revolves around me, right?
Cutting out her friends as their baggage encroaches on her personal escapism and her ability to tune out the real world. Way more Evangelion than it has any need to be. It's not all moping and misery though. The show does make sure to know that there's hope for Reggie. In one episode, she develops a crush on an older girl called Connolly, but entirely lacks the emotional maturity and vocabulary needed to express herself. So her feelings manifest as frustration and awkwardness. In that moment, she runs to hide from the situation in embarrassment, but this shows that she is not entirely immune from the realities of growing up. And by the end of the season, she's a lot more confident in herself and around Connolly. But let's get back to the portal element of this portal fantasy, because I've barely talked about Endless itself. At first glance, it might appear that Endless is too silly for a show that takes such a surprisingly real approach to its subject matter, but that's kind of the point. As far as Reggie knows, she magically conjured up the island as a place to escape from the harsh, boring reality of the world. It's full of zany, wacky characters and threatened by a butt witch, masterfully voiced by Matt Berry.
Your face, so pasty, like an uncooked muffin. How about a pop of colour?
Clearly not something to be taken seriously. In fact, for most of the series, we don't even know if Endless is real or just something that exists in the shared imagination of Reggie and co. But like the show itself, things are darker than they first appear. It starts with a few disturbing characters, expands into the weird, voyeuristic, controlling nature of the island itself, and becomes more evident when certain inhabitants are implied to have been formerly human. It gradually dawns on the audience that Endless isn't a magical place that exists to let Reggie have fun forever, it's a trap. A sinister deception pandering to Reggie's most selfish impulses and manipulating her to give into her worst self, in order to isolate and trap her on the island, keeping her 12 forever.
You used to be a regular kid?
I was, but somewhere along the way I lost myself. My body started to deteriorate. I'm not quite sure who I am anymore.
That's so sad. No, it's awesome. You got to live here and be a kid forever.
The island represents the temptations of escapism and the dangers of infantilization. And again, as opposed to a character like Luz, whose story reinforces the idea of being true to yourself no matter what, and not worrying about having to fit in, 12 Forever warns of the dangers of taking that to its extreme, and why you need to accept the basic realities of growing up, and why you shouldn't reject the outside world to cling to childish desires.
Oh, please, this place is making you delusional!
And again, you really can question whether or not those are the right messages for a kids show, but I'll say that it makes for some damn interesting TV, and I was genuinely impressed with 12 Forever. However, none of that really matters. I said this was the show with the least fanfare on the list, and there is a good reason for that. If you've heard of 12 Forever before this video, it's probably not for the actual show itself, but for the controversy surrounding the show's creator, Julia Vickerman. And I apologise if you've been enjoying the video up until this point, but this is where we take a sharp left turn into some real unsavoury shit. I said there would be a big caveat surrounding this show, and this is it. So I cannot believe I'm having to do this in this video, but trigger warning, I guess, for workplace abuse, very questionable Twitter content, and I don't think I can actually say the word out loud without being demonetized, so behavior that definitely shouldn't be happening between adults and children. I swear to God. So the series hadn't even debuted when some old posts began to circulate from Vickerman's Twitter and Tumblr, and I could go through each of these and be aghast at how anyone could ever post these, but honestly, this isn't supposed to be a witch hunt. There was that whole James Gunn controversy where he got kicked out of Marvel for some old tweets making fun about touchy subjects, and it was all very silly. Jokes are jokes. James Gunn's 10-year-old posts were clearly jokes, and it was right that Disney eventually let him back in. And giving Vickerman the same benefit of the doubt, I think some of her controversial tweets can be explained as jokes in bad taste. The one where she describes someone she knows as a child molester, that's just banter between friends. The one where she remarks on how the screening of Scott Pilgrim was filled with skinny, nerdy boys, it's not necessarily explicit. The one where she describes putting a wig on a 14-year-old boy and carrying him around a dance floor. Okay, yeah, no, I'm definitely starting to see a pattern here. But all of this is peanuts compared to her Tumblr, which featured a blog post about the day she and her boyfriend spent at a carnival stalking a beautifully androgynous, long black-haired 14-year-old boy, who Vickerman was instantaneously infatuated with, who she followed to try and sneak photos of. Oh God, if only his mother hadn't been there. The day concludes with Vickerman initiating contact between herself and the boy and his mum by offering them her spare tickets, to which she watches her muse push his dyed black hair behind his ear as he thanked her. Fuck, this was the best day ever, why am I so creepy? Hashtag, well, you can see it for yourselves. Way more Evangelion than it has any need to be. There are times when someone in the public eye has to deal with old posts resurfacing, and a lot of the time they can just be brushed off. Oh, it was just a joke. Oh, it's taken out of context. Oh, they were just a kid when they made it. This shit, there's no coming back from. I don't know what possessed her to ever think it was a good idea to make a blog post about the time she stalked a minor who she was attracted to. But once the internet got a hold of it, you could say goodbye to any discourse about this show. But that wasn't even the end of Vickerman's issues. Behind the scenes of 12 Forever was a whole other list of controversies. The show was delayed and delayed by Netflix with almost no promotion or even social media from the people who'd worked on it. Whether or not this was Netflix trying to purposefully silence any noise around the show due to Vickerman's past being exposed, or this was just typical Netflix lackluster promotion, I can't really say, but controversy or not, 12 Forever's fate was sealed. The production company behind actually making the show, Puny Entertainment, which was owned by Shady Potosky and Chris Hardwick, yes, that Chris Hardwick, had already closed down before the show had even aired. But before they closed, Puny were in the midst of a legal conflict due to Julia Vickerman's misconduct during production. Now, what exactly that misconduct was, we'll never really know, but there have been rumours that Vickerman was generally abusive towards staff on the show and acted in a sexually inappropriate manner towards more than one of them. Again, we don't know anything for certain, but we do know that another production company for the show, Cartel Entertainment, took out a court case against Puny in order to protect themselves from being found liable, and accusing Puny of not taking actions against Vickerman's misconduct after a number of storyboarders had complained about her. Following this, like I said, Puny closed down for good. So you had a show that Netflix were seemingly trying to bury, a creator who'd been exposed as a creep, and the production company behind the show now defunct, all before the show had even aired. It's like they were trying to speedrun every way that the show wouldn't get picked up for a second season. And after all that, with a reputation in tatters and a production company literally shutting down as a result of her actions, you'd be forgiven for assuming that Julia Vickerman would never work in animation again. But no, this is Hollywood, where anyone's dreams can come true. As recently as 2021, Vickerman has a credit to her name as a storyboard artist on Raya and the Last Dragon. Not even a little indie feature film as a favour from a friend, no, a fucking Disney feature. And in fairness, animation is a long process. Just because the movie came out in 2021, she likely worked on it 2 or 3 years prior. Controversy might not have been as widely known at the time, but I'm going to keep eyes on her IMDb because, call me crazy, but I don't think people who are openly attracted to kids should be working in kids entertainment. Just my suggestion, Hollywood. And this is all just a massive shame because I genuinely do think that 12 Forever was a good show with some good ideas. I've heard claims that due to her behaviour, Vickerman was quietly booted from the show early on in production and was only really showrunner in name only, and didn't actually have that much to do with the making of 12 Forever beyond its concept, but I have no idea how true that is. If you're interested in 12 Forever and that makes you more comfortable in checking it out, there's some plausible deniability for you. Enjoy! So we've looked at each of these Portal fantasies in turn, what each had to say, and trying to figure out where this micro-genre came from. But where is it going? With the last of these shows closing out, what will their legacy be on animation as a whole? Well, if you look at the news surrounding the animation industry, it's not great. Warner Bros. Head of Kids and Family Programming, Amy Friedman, who oversees Cartoon Network, made headlines for announcing that Cartoon Network would be introducing live-action content into their programming, justifying the decision by saying that girls graduate out of animation before boys do.
A significant percentage that's noteworthy, not just of children in the world, but also of the adults, mature and fully developed viewers. Every statistic, diagram, map, and chart shows that our popularity has crossed all boundaries of age, and a massive part of our viewers come from the female of the species, women, girls.
Elsewhere, Netflix got themselves into hot water by setting subscriber growth targets that didn't factor in the finite nature of the Earth's population, and in response seemingly decided to gut their entire animation division. It's easy to look at these news stories and assume that Western animation is in a very bad place, and that the shows in this list failed to have the necessary impact, but personally, I'm not all that bothered by any of this. Take the Netflix situation and how the discourse is that Netflix might be pulling out of animation, but it wasn't that long ago that the same discourse was championing animation as the saviour of the entertainment industry. So what gives? You have one crisis and animation is the future of Netflix, then you have another crisis and it's the first sacrifice at the altar of budget cuts. Well, to me, as uninteresting as it sounds, this is just course correction. During the pandemic, when filming wasn't possible, they went in hard on animation. Now that live action is back to being the norm, the recent issues of Netflix have just been a catalyst to reset things how they were pre-COVID. Yes, it sucks that a bunch of shows got cancelled, even before they had a chance to air in some cases, but I don't see this as the end for animation on Netflix. As for the comments from Cartoon Network, the old argument was that girls over 10 stop watching cartoons because nobody makes cartoons for girls over 10, but that's not really valid anymore. Alongside 12 Forever, Kipo, The Owl House, Infinity Train and Amphibia, we've also seen The Legend of Korra, Steven Universe, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, Miraculous, Carmen Sandiego, The Dragon Prince and She-Ra, all in the last 10 years. All shows that skew slightly older and if not outright female-led, have a healthy female presence and following. So for Cartoon Network to still trot out the old argument that girls don't watch cartoons, surely that indicates that all these shows failed, right? Well, if I've learned one thing from listening to the creators of these series, it's that these shows aren't really greenlit on the back of facts and figures and analytics. They live and die by fitting in with whatever the highest salary earner thinks. These shows only get made because an executive liked the idea and was willing to bat for it. Similarly, when they get cancelled, it's often because someone wants to shake up the programming and do things their way, not because they're backed up by the numbers.
I can't really speak to like why networks pick up or don't pick up things. I mean, I can, but you know, it's all based on emotions but an executive has at that particular moment.
Yeah.
But I think it was just I know at the time at the Cartoon Network, it was sort of like the person who was in charge sort of felt like he seemed to do things where sort of like he chooses a couple of shows that are like, oh, this is a classic TV show that feels like it should be a show. And then occasionally he would every year sort of be like, and maybe we'll do one or two weird things. And then Infinity Train was just one of the weird things.
You only need to look at what Dana Terrace said about the ending of The Owl House. It didn't get cut short because the numbers were bad. It was because someone higher up wanted to change things. Warner Bros. Had just about finished up their merger with Discovery when Amy Friedman made her comments about girls graduating from animation. Would have been a time of huge upheaval within the corporation, and I imagine the decision for Cartoon Network to play with the idea of live action either came from Friedman or someone above her wanting to leave their mark on the network and prove their value within the company, rather than some sort of hard evidence that girls just biologically switch off from cartoons at a certain age. I mean, you only need to look at some of the shows that are being greenlit across the industry, including at Cartoon Network themselves, to see that the statement is little more than just regurgitating a comforting lie back at the industry to justify some bigwig making a controversial call. If that was the case, why would Cartoon Network be greenlighting Invincible Fight Girl or bringing back Genndy Tartakovsky to make Unicorn? If they really believed that girls grow out of animation, why would they be making their first young female adult-aimed series in Fiona and Cake? Never mind what the rest of the industry is doing. Why would Cartoon Network be making these decisions if they actually believed what they said? And you can't tell me after all the shows on this list and others from the past decade or so that have pushed that envelope for older animations, the continued growth of anime in the West, and the success of explicitly adult dramas like Love, Death and Robots, Castlevania, Invincible, Arcane, that actually, no, the demographics haven't changed since 1985. It's nonsense. I don't buy it at all. The industry knows exactly what direction animation is going in, even if some executives won't admit it yet. So, again, I'm not that bothered about all this bad press. Hi, it's me interrupting my own video, because not 2 days after I decided to record this entire voiceover, HBO Max decided to take a big chunk of their library of original animated content round the back of the shed and put a bullet in it. And now you could take that new information and call me an idiot for not being more concerned about the state of Western animation, or, hold that thought, an alternate reading that I prefer is that actually that all just backs up what I was saying. Because a big part of the reason why I was inadvertently downplaying these issues was based on things showrunners like Owen Dennis and Dana Terrace were saying. That cartoons don't always get judged based on success or quality, but on the opinions of whoever's calling the shots. Bigwigs, executives, CEOs, and that's clearly what was happening at Warner Bros. Discovery with HBO Max. And don't get me wrong, that is very concerning and a virtually unprecedented situation. Shows do get cancelled, shows get dropped from these services, but what's happening with HBO Max is them actively attempting to erase these shows from existence. So you get things like them deleting even the most innocuous content about Infinity Train from their social media platforms. So yeah, that situation, like I said, it's very worrying, but unfortunately it's also a little bit beyond the scope of this video. The topic at hand was what the legacy of these female-led portal fantasies will be, and things like the comment about girls graduating from animation before boys, in that context, those can be addressed. Whatever's happening at HBO Max is on a completely different level and is unfortunately a completely different, scummy, miserable topic. I think it's fair to say, even with the context of what was happening at Netflix and Cartoon Network, nobody expected Warner Bros. Discovery to do the kind of thing that they did. But really, when we're measuring the success and the impact of these shows, it's not always about looking at it like an executive. If you asked any of the creators, I bet they'd all have a different story about what success looks like. In some ways, these shows succeeded just by existing, with stories that ask questions kids shows aren't allowed to ask, with heroes that don't always get the spotlight, and presented with sound and visuals that are less and less what we expect from a kids show. You only need to take a quick look online at the communities that have grown around these stories to see the impact they're having for fans of all ages, with characters and moments that will live long in the memory well after new episodes have stopped airing. The shows in this video carried the flame from the generation of cartoons before them, and continued to push the envelope of what these shows can be. Western animation is learning to redefine itself with new stories for new audiences, and I wouldn't be surprised if in just a few years we look back on these shows as those first tentative steps into a bigger, wider world. Thanks for watching. No, seriously, thanks for watching. I genuinely do appreciate it. I suspect by the time that this video is up, it will have been several months since my last video, which I'm not proud of, but in my defense, since that last upload, I caught COVID. Twice! In the space of about 7 weeks, after somehow avoiding it for 2 years, I got it twice within a couple of months. So that's why I've not been as busy or active on videos on this channel as I would have liked to have been, so I can apologize for that. Hopefully this video makes up for it in some way, because This is by some distance the longest script I've ever written for a video. I know I've done some unscripted ones that might be longer in runtime, but this is the highest effort video I've probably ever made. So hopefully that makes up for the lack of uploads. But anyway, you know, if you've made it to this part of the video, I just want to thank you again. I will have other videos that I will be putting on the screen now that you can watch if you haven't watched them yet, and subscribe. Can I really ask for that? It feels so dirty. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, hang around, subscribe, watch some others, and I'll see you next time for something else. Thanks.